Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Sarah Jones with Politicus Radio. Joining me to talk about Bernie Sanders' upset in the Michigan Democratic primary is Politicus USA's editor-in-chief, Jason Easley.
Thanks for having me.
I didn't get to say thanks for joining us, but I guess it's a little late, so we'll excuse me. Hillary Clinton was projected to take Michigan. In fact, there were no recent polls that showed her with less than a 10-point lead. Yet Bernie Sanders took the state, rocking the political establishment tonight. Although the delegates will be split almost in half from the state, so Sanders still has a mountain to climb in terms of delegates in order to catch up with Clinton. What does this mean for Bernie Sanders?
Oh, it's a momentum changer. He needed to win. He had two criteria he had to meet. He needed to win somewhere that was big, and he needed to win somewhere with a significant minority percentage of the Democratic electorate. He accomplished that in Michigan. He pulled off a win that, frankly, the polling said wasn't going to happen, and the polling was unanimous. The polling was epically wrong in every direction. And I think that's a whole other story of, did the pollsters get the projected turnout model wrong, or did Bernie Sanders do something different with the turnout that the pollsters weren't anticipating? That's the big what if here.
Yeah, this is so shocking. I mean, it was way off the polls. The other thing is that there have been issues. We heard some issues with not having enough ballots in, I think it was Detroit, but this isn't the first time they've had issues. They're understaffed and underfunded, basically, in Detroit and in several of the, I would say, predominantly African American communities, and that's the state has said we don't have the money to have precincts here, and I think they've made it harder and harder to vote. Now I don't know if that impacted tonight at all. We have no reason to think that it did, but it is a factor that's been out there. And Hillary Clinton, the interesting thing is, before the results came in, we did a show and we talked about how Bernie Sanders was hitting Hillary Clinton with the whole trade agreement issue, and she was hitting him with the auto bailout. So I thought it was interesting that in the areas where the UAW, the United Auto Worker Union, is strong, that she did very well there. So this seems like it's almost like you're going to have to peel away all the layers and find out how people made this decision and what changed their mind, or if they did change their mind.
Well, before we went on the air, you mentioned a statistic where Hillary Clinton won with Democrats, but she lost by like 40 points with independents.
Yeah.
Or some gigantic number.
Yeah,
that's
40,
your number. That's what happened.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. That's how she lost. Bernie Sanders brought out the students, the independents, the same groups he's been doing well with in every race, came out strong, and I'm going to suspect that the fact that he picked up 1/3 of the African American vote, which is twice as much as he's gotten in other states, was the difference in winning and losing here. There's a whole lot of questions, but for the Bernie Sanders people, this is a great moment for their campaign. I mean, they've worked hard. They've really, 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 really tried to run the kind of campaign that they could be proud of, that other people could be proud of. They earned this victory. I mean, it wasn't given to them. It wasn't handed to them. They beat the polls. They beat all the expectations, and they won. And that is a really big accomplishment for them, and I think it says a lot about the Democratic Party that while Donald Trump is beating down a gang of clowns and stooges and also-rans, there are two good Democratic candidates who are running hard at each other, but not dirty.
Well, that's very true. I mean, but this is what I'm wondering. I'm looking forward to get all this the numbers broken down probably sometime tomorrow. But to hear exactly why people made this choice, and if it had to do with the trade issue, which seems to be the big issue. Now, it's interesting because in the Democratic Party, people are debating these very specific issues. I mean, you're just not seeing this. We had Donald Trump put on the weirdest press conference. I don't think I should even call it that. That's what they billed it as, but it wasn't. He didn't even mic the press. You couldn't hear their questions. They only took them at the end, and he mocked reporters. So it was a weird to contrast with what Hillary Clinton did. She came on and gave a speech after Mississippi that was a really policy-oriented, good speech.
Yeah, it's interesting that the only polls that showed a really close race in Michigan, there was a brief mention of this on cable news tonight, was Hillary Clinton's campaign's internal polls. Her internal polls showed a very close election in Michigan, and her internal polls were right. As far as the difference in press conferences, you could tell also that the Sanders campaign doesn't seem like they were really expecting to win Michigan, because they didn't actually have a big event set up or a speech set up for him. He just kind of came out into this little hotel room venue area, gave a statement for a few minutes while the results were still coming in and the race hadn't been called yet, and he left. So this qualifies, I think, as a legitimate shocker.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, everyone except for the Hillary campaign apparently did not see this coming.
Yeah.
It's important to note in the bigger picture that it is possible. I mean, Bernie Sanders does not have the delegates. It's not like he's beating her. This is a big shock, but he's not beating her. And in 2008, Obama lost Ohio and Pennsylvania, which he then won in November. So in case Democrats are getting worried if one candidate wins or the other wins, does this mean they're going to lose this state? I don't think so.
Yeah, political scientists have shown that when the states you win in a primary have no bearing on what happens in a general election because the electorates are different. Primary electorates are smaller. They're the more dedicated, hardcore voters, which means that if somebody like Bernie Sanders was the nominee, he's probably going to do better with independents. That point's probably going to hold. There's going to be some carryover there. Maybe not in Michigan, but as a general rule. But in terms of states, you can't project what person X did in a primary will carry over to November. So I would say that in a matchup of Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump in places like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, it's not going to matter. The Democrats going to be favored.
Where do you think these independents come from? I know that used to be a big thing, but it's very strange in what everyone describes as this polarized and political environment to think that there's this huge segment of independents.
We always talk about the far-right conservative that has switched to independent. The Tea Partier who doesn't want to identify as a Republican but always votes Republican. But there is another subset within there of moderates who have become sort of disaffected or disenchanted with both parties, who registered independent, who used to vote, who voted maybe Republican in the past, Democrat in the past. Not true independent, but maybe with some conservative leanings, mildly. And I think some of Sanders' message would appeal to voters like that. And I think he would be able to bring some of them out. The people that are turned off by Trump and his crassness, but are angry at politics, or believe we need real change.
Isn't that? I mean, it makes perfect sense, and yet it doesn't, because isn't that quite a swing to be a Republican who would vote for what Republicans are calling a socialist? And they leave out the democratic socialists, and they don't get into the fine details of that. But isn't that, I mean, nobody would have expected that.
It's really interesting, and I think it's something that needs to be explored more, because it's right now, that idea is still more of a concept, because there's not enough data to look at from people voting to see. But it's a educated guess that might be what's going on. As far as where the Democratic race goes from here, man, isn't Ohio really big now?
Yeah. I think it's big on both sides, isn't it? Because, Kasich has to pull that out, too. I mean,
yeah, it's big for Republicans and Democrats. But, I mean, for Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton,
yeah,
isn't the next week in the campaigning in Ohio really going to be something? And, I don't think anybody should be surprised if Bernie Sanders starts heading to a lot more to Florida and plans a lot more trips into Florida. And, out there they were already concentrating on Illinois as well, but the Florida, they might, because they kind of thought Florida might be out of their reach a little bit. They you could see the priority tier was Ohio, Illinois, then Florida. I think they might change that up a little bit and spend a lot more time in Florida too, and just kind of go for broke. It's really, this has been a fun Democratic race whenever everybody thought it was going to be boring, dull, and predictable. And it has been anything but. It has been fun to watch two good quality candidates discuss the issues and
well, when you could see them, I mean, let's not forget that.
Oh yeah, well, that's a whole other, we could do an episode tomorrow on what MSNBC pulled by showing all of Donald Trump's press conference live and tape delaying Hillary Clinton's speech.
I've never seen anything like this. I mean, what kind of bias is going on there? But we'll talk about that tomorrow. But that was really, see, that's the problem, is if voters are not exposed to Democrats, which is, that happens, their Democratic message, which I was really excited about when Bernie got into this race, because I knew then, between Bernie and Hillary Clinton, we're going to be having some great discussions about issues and getting into really the finer details. But the public needs to be exposed to these ideas so they can decide for themselves. And it's, what kind of bias is it to let Donald Trump talk for an hour about his stakes and
Sorry.
I mean, well, that's what he did, and
it's just so ridiculous.
It's appalling, and there's no excuse for it. And then they, they didn't go to Hillary Clinton was a lot shorter, and
Brian Williams made the excuse that the reason why they didn't go to Hillary Clinton is because she chose to come out and speak while Donald Trump was speaking.
Oh,
that was their reasoning.
Oh well. We wouldn't want, we wouldn't want Hillary to speak while
we wouldn't want
Donald
the
was
former
talking.
senator and secretary of state,
right,
to get at least equal live airtime to a reality TV star who's pushing his products.
All he was doing was pushing his Trump water, Trump steaks, which turned out to perhaps not even be Trump steaks, and Trump magazine. That's what he was doing. I mean, all right, well, we have good news for Democrats in the sense that the message for liberals, the message that Bernie Sanders is pushing on this campaign about fairer policies for the working class, basically.
Income inequality, rebuilding the middle class, a living wage.
And what we didn't talk about, and might be interesting, and no one has mentioned this that I've heard, is campaign finance laws are just really awful in Michigan. And I wonder if part of his message about that resonated, but we'll have to see the numbers and hear from some people, see what the voters were thinking when they were, made their decision.
Yeah, I think Bernie's message, the Sanders message, is really changing the Democratic Party. It's changing the Democratic race. It's having an impact, and it is just a breath of fresh air. And the record, the big turnout in Michigan tonight, pretty much put a nail in the coffin in the myth of low Democratic enthusiasm, quote unquote. They could have nearly 1 million votes in Michigan tonight.
Wow. Hillary, it looks like she won a few counties in northern Michigan that went for Romney. And that's another thing to talk about, but we did talk about that in a earlier podcast. But I think to expand on that, not tonight, but another time, how she's peeling off a few of these Republicans. So is Bernie Sanders. Isn't that interesting? Or he's peeling off independents who may be disaffected Republicans. So either way, you have Democrats. You have Democrats appealing to Republicans on some level, which is interesting.
Broadening their tent.
Big tent.
While
yes.
the Republicans become a TP of hate led by Donald Trump.
A TP of hate. Well, on that note, everyone run from the TP of hate. This is Sarah Jones, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in.